received a wire. In fact, for the past several months, rebel troops have been making threatening movements in western Maryland and southern Pennsylvania. And so 2 weeks ago, we saw fit to issue another additional call for 100,000 more troops. 2 days ago, I received a dispatch from Major General Darius Couch in Harrisburg that the rebels are presently burning bridges along the Northern Central Railroad, and that he's lost approximately 400 men in the vicinity of York in a little village called Gettysburg, near Chambersburg.
Lard and put that over the edge.
Yeah.
Wipe it across. It looks neat because everything is, and it does cut down the possibility of chain fire. But
that's what the cream is supposed to do.
I've seen that happen once.
Well, that'll get your attention.
Where you come in from?
Fulton.
Fulton?
Come on, you guys don't know where Fulton, Wisconsin is?
I thought you're talking Missouri.
Do you know where Indian Fort is?
Indian Fort? Indian Fort?
I do,
Fort
I
Dickinson?
do.
Oh, I'm about 15 miles from Fort Dickinson.
That's close.
At our camp there, Union Camp is back in here. Don't go into the Union Camp and go follow the road that...
I'm Second Lieutenant Del Tedrick with Battery G, 2nd Illinois Light Artillery. I'm a section commander. I have one 20-pound parrot and a 10-pound parrot. I'm going to explain briefly how the gun operates. These are all muzzle-loading guns. Most of the activity takes place at the front end of the gun. You have a 4-man crew on the gun plus a gun sergeant, one at each corner of the gun. The number 1 man is the ram man and the wet sponge man. He has the most dangerous job because he's the one who pushes the round to the back of the chamber for firing. You saw a lot of one-armed number 1 men at the end of the Civil War. The number 2 man is the corporal of the piece, and he gives basically the commands, and he's also the one who primes or punctures the bag for firing through this priming hole here. The number 1 command will be worm. Number 3 man will worm the barrel to be sure there's nothing down there. Then the command is wet sponge. The number 1 man dampens the end of the sponge, places it down the bore, turns it, and makes sure all sparks, anything that's down there, are going to be picked up. Then we do the dry sponge. The dry sponge is inserted down and dried out the barrel. Then the command for load is given. A powder monkey will come from the limber box with a round and deliver it to the number 3 man here, who will turn and place it in the muzzle of the piece. As soon as he has cleared the piece, the corporal again will give the command ram, and the round is rammed back to the back of the chamber. At that time, the gun is loaded and ready for further procedure. The gun sergeant then gives the command ready. The corporal will take a priming wire down through this bag, poke a hole in that bag so that the powder will go off. He will place it in there with a lanyard on the primer. You step back out of the way. As soon as they're certain that everyone is clear of the piece, the command fire is given. He pulls on the lanyard, strikes the match, the fire goes down and up, ignites the powder in a bag, and it goes out the front of the barrel. When you get done, you start all over and do it again. A good crew can do it about 3 times a minute. Government regulations said, no, you only do it once every 3 minutes because we don't want you to use your ammunition up too fast.
Cease firing! And
Curtis.
right then. Good?
Couldn't remember your last name.
All right. You pointing that at me? You pointing that at me? Pointing at him. He's a private.
Pointing at me. Pointing at him. He's more important.
Okay, you are assigned to me, soldier. Do you understand what that means?
I understand.
Duties as assigned.
As assigned.
You could be put on a crew at any second. You could be running messages. In fact, I may send you to the Confederates.
I'm ready.
Okay, you're ready for anything.
Ready.
Keep your pistol loaded.
Okay.
Powder dry.
Powder is dry.
And your mouth shut.
Mouth shut.
Very good.
For a second.
Hello, my name is First Sergeant Almiron Armstrong of the 1st United States Sharpshooters Company C. 1st United States Sharpshooters were formed up in 1861. The green uniform was the first adaptation for camouflage purposes in the Army. And the original unit was started up by Hiram Berdan at the beginning of the war. You know, he wanted an elite group of expert marksmen, you know, to form up an elite regiment. The regiment, the qualifications, every man in the regiment had to qualify in order to join. The qualifications for, you know, the regiment were that every man had to fire at 200 yards, 10 shots. And what they would do is they would measure out on a string of 50 inches in 10 shots, and every man, you know, so they would measure from the center of the target to the center of the bullet, so that in 10 shots, if you went outside the 50 inches, you were automatically disqualified. Unlike normal volunteer regiments at the time, where all you would have to do is go in and sign the muster, and you were automatically in, you had to qualify in order to join the 1st United States Sharpshooters. Basically, I can explain to you about the rifle. This is the standard weapon for the United States Sharpshooters, which is a Sharps breech-loading, you know, rifle. It's a 52 caliber, you know, made in 1859, military, and this was their standard infantry weapon, you know, towards the middle of the war. I got involved in 1990. Some college friends of mine who do Civil War reenacting, you know, were involved in it, and you know, recruited me, got me involved, and I love history, so I basically, you know, stuck with it, and you know, went through, you know, all the perils. I've been Confederate artillery, Union artillery, Confederate infantry with Medich's battalion, been Union infantry, and now I'm, you know, doing the 1st United States Sharpshooters, which I enjoy doing 1st United States because the simple fact is that it's not just blue and gray. You know, there was other units that had, you know, played a vital role in the, you know, in the Civil War.
I'm from Madison. This is my first reenactment. I've never tried this before. Some friends of mine at work told me about it, and I love history too. I read a lot. When they told me, come on out and try it, we'll outfit you, I had to give it a try.
5th New York Zouaves. This was a unit that was formed by Colonel Duryea. The Zouaves were patterned after the French armies in northern Africa, and that's basically what this uniform was typical of. The Napoleonic Wars were taught in West Point, of course, and all of the officer corps that came out of West Point were aware of the French style, Napoleonic style of fighting and maneuvering, and so Napoleon and his tactics were used to a large extent. The Zouaves were largely social military units that would get together and parade and march, and naturally when the war came along they had all this expertise early on, and gradually they just filtered right into the regular army, or the army units, I should say. They were still militias representing New York. The uniform that I'm wearing was discarded after a few years, primarily because of the difficulty in getting in and out of it. There were various Zouave units from both sides. There was a group out of Milwaukee that was a Zouave unit. Louisiana Tigers wore pants that were baggy like this, but they were striped. There were Pennsylvania Zouaves that had regular blue trousers, but you can always spot the Zouaves by their short jacket. This is the Zouave jacket style, and it buttoned up at the top, and that's one of the typical earmarks of a Zouave uniform. There are units from Pennsylvania all over.
Being such a bright color, weren't you afraid of being an easy target?
Well, at that time when they started out, everybody was an easy target because you would stand up and shoot at each other with weapons that far outdated the tactics. Standing up and shooting at someone at 50, 75 yards away with the muskets that were rifled that could carry 300 or 400 yards with great accuracy was stupid. And it wasn't until late 62, 63, when people started, the soldiers started to build breastworks, defensive positions they would hide behind. And as a result, that moved into the tactics of the war itself. But it was the GI, so to speak, that developed this, and it wasn't the officers. The officers were fighting in the early 1800s. The weaponry was in the middle 1800s.
You know, when you're not reenacting, what's your normal job?
I'm a school teacher. I teach in Racine. And insofar as the Civil War history goes, I don't do much reenacting as such. I'm a competitive skirmisher. We shoot these muskets with live ammunition at targets. So unlike the reenactors who use them for play acting with, really, we use them for breaking targets, and even some people use them for hunting with. So we know how effective these weapons can really be.
The U.S. Sanitary Commission. That's a northern organization that was formed at the beginning of the war because 2/3 of the men were dying from disease rather than bullet wounds. You see, President Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers and 200,000 to 300,000 men showed up. Therefore, they didn't have the right foods, clothing, or accommodations. The ladies in the North, when their men left for the war, formed sewing circles, small groups of ladies that would communicate by letters with their men, and when they heard that they were dying, 2 out of every 3 men were dying from disease rather than bullet wounds, the ladies knew it was time to do something. And so they started holding lawn parties and dime parties, anything to earn monies, to send the right foods and clothing to their men. Well, those supplies were put to the side by the military, unfortunately, and many times didn't arrive on time or in good condition for their men. And so those groups of ladies, eventually 7,000 groups of ladies in the North, formed the U.S. Sanitary Commission, and they held huge fairs in Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. And at those fairs they earned millions of dollars for the Northern cause. With those funds, they sent wagon trains south toward Vicksburg and Atlanta as Sherman made his march to the sea. Those supply wagons were full of food, clothing, and medicines, and they also paid doctors who were agents to go into the major encampments.
Sure, can I get a picture?
And at those encampments, they would inspect the men and inspect the camps and send their recommendations back to the Northern Organization. Those sanitary fairs held had their own music, the Sanitary Fair Grand March and the Sanitary Fair Waltz and polkas. After the war, Clara Barton called us the American Red Cross.
Those of you who are watching, if you will sort of look at the battlefield as a checkerboard with pawns, with human pawns and bishops and kings moving back and forth, it will somewhat explain some of the movements that you'll see within both of the armies. You have to remember that military tactics and formations of the Civil War on both sides were 100 years behind the military strategy and armament that was being used. And so even though we're working with black powder, single-shot, front-end loaded muskets that were effective at 350 yards, depending on the shooter, you'll see formations that are based on the concept of 100 yards between the enemies. For those of you who have shoes on your feet, left and right, you can also thank a Union quartermaster general for that. And interestingly enough, it was shoes that brought about the Battle of Gettysburg. Neither side anticipated that they would be battling at Gettysburg. But by chance, a Confederate squadron had heard that there was a shoe warehouse in Gettysburg, a supply of shoes. And shoes, women, and whiskey were the priorities of the average soldier during the Civil War. And I don't think it has changed much in 130 years, to be very frank. And it was a Confederate patrol entering the main street of Gettysburg that ran into a Union cavalry patrol that started the battle that we now refer to as Gettysburg. The sound of the muskets, we see the front line of the Union cavalry coming up, engaging with the Confederate cavalry. You might say, well, gee, they're all firing, nobody's going down. Well, if you ever try to fire a pistol while you're on a horse, you're moving around much more than you are. Union skirmishers are in a skirmish line, the traditional uniform formation, are moving forward to take advantage of the cavalry battle here. And as the battle moves from left to right or further up the field, you see more of the infantry and more of the artillery coming into the fray. They are wearing authentic reproductions of the kinds of uniforms that you will find in 1863. You'll notice that Union forces are fairly uniform in their infantry units as well as artillery units. Dark blue jackets or 4-button sackcoats, curtain blue trousers, and the weaponry is fairly standardized. Whereas in the Confederates, you'll notice a multiplicity of weaponry, multiple colors of uniforms and such. I think 1863, because of the blockade, and because of the industrial might of the North, the standardization of the equipment and uniform on the North is quite prevalent. That'll explain to some degree the various movements of the military units that you see out there.
Always had to be kept out of harm's way so that they could not only direct movements but also to try and find out where gaps would occur or possibly where strengths could be exploited. Once the preliminary positions on either side have been established, then the veterans, as you can see, the infantry marching before us could be brought in, and then later on, Union infantry would be brought in to meet them. Farmsteads were very safe in battle. Fields were trampled. Hogs and cattle were taken for food.
Armament that is being used fairly obsolete in many of these tactics. And it is a wonder that we only lost 625,000 men.
There were several different types of chip carrying shells that are live
It's not going to be a simple 3-minute engagement. We know that the other far end of the field too, Confederate infantry has now moved again en masse. The similarity between the movements and the formations was written by a former Union lieutenant general who was a Confederate lieutenant general during the Civil War, Lieutenant General Hardee. So both men on the sides are using the same kind of military tactics, orders, and formations. Firing at an enemy that you could see, that you could hear, and that you could smell. And as Bell Wiley said in his book, Billy Yank, the Civil War was the last courageous war that the United States has been in because of that. Large battlefront formation that we see the Confederates coming up the field now with a picket line in front of them. It seems that the Confederate commander has decided to make this a battle for the day. Brought up the reserve units as well as his main 2 divisions with a battlefront of 4 deep. And 100 across.
What's another one we're supposed to move on? Whoa! Canister!
Try to get with the suction. Pull it out really quick, Steve.
General Doubleday knew that these men would be needed as something went wrong, and that's exactly what happened. As General Davis of Mississippi moved forward, they got themselves into the Mississippi men. One of the most brave and deadly charges of the war, and said almost 400 to 500 Wisconsin soldiers charged that day across 175 miles of open field. 5 minutes.
That was the Iron Brigade.
They captured the bloody railroad cut, moving Davis and Mississippi Brigade out. Again, over 200 men from Mississippi were taken in the flank and rear. Captured, including the colors of Mississippi. One of the first colors ever taken in the Battle of Gettysburg. That flag made a run for the capital of Madison, where it stayed for so many years. It returned after the war, however.
The problem is we're in the way between the two. We're very proud.
Hospitable, is that how I want to say? And I have been enthusiastic about it. Yeah, very much so. I mean, you know, open. Is it at least an officer? What's that? Is it at least an officer? All I could get was a grunt. And a prisoner. That was worse, though. That's just wonderful. Very well, sir. Take a picture now! Come on, guys. Great. I don't want that. was a walk.
Come on, you're gonna walk on the rest of it. Forward, march. Corporal, drummer.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This is a camp of the 41st Virginia Infantry out of Petersburg, Virginia. And this is a typical campaign type camp. And what makes it different from many of the other camps that are in this area is that the soldiers, when they were moving from place to place, because there were no trains or nothing to take them around, they would carry everything that they have on their person. So their house, their eating utensils, everything of that nature would have to be carried. Now, this over here is what is called a shelter half. Essentially what it is, it's a piece of canvas. And instead of making a tent out of it, it is simply just tied up between trees to make a lean-to. The next one over here has a piece of canvas as well as a poncho over to help keep it from leaking. And over, if you can look over back there, that black one, that is a poncho that was put up there. Evidently that person didn't feel that carrying the extra 7 to 8 pounds of canvas was worth it, so he doesn't even carry canvas. Cam, sir, Cam, if you could.
Would you like my pack?
Right.
Hello, man.
Now all these things here would simply be put into a pack. All these things would simply be put in a pack or rolled up and carried on the back. Okay, for example, the lean-tos would be folded up there, your blankets would be folded up in there, your personal items would all be in that pack. And that's what you would travel with, that's what the soldier would have as they march their 5, 7, 10, 15, sometimes 20 to 25 miles per day with everything that they own on their back. Now that is why this is called a campaign, because we're on campaign, we're going from place to place, and we have to carry everything.
If this were winter, we would probably be in little log huts or shebangs made from 2 shelter halves on top of low log walls dug down into the ground. And we could acquire a lot more stuff. At the beginning of the war, we had wagons. We could load company stuff on the wagon. There was one wagon per company. As horses began to die off, we're not short of wagons, but we're short of horses to be able to pull the wagons. And so now we're lucky if each regiment has a wagon. The men have to carry what they can carry. So everything on their back is what goes with them. This is our home. We stop and set up home, and we break it down. We can be out of here in 15 minutes and on the road.
Packing up his stuff. Essentially, he has everything right there that you would see in one of those small areas, and they're all fitting into this backpack. And you can see how quick it goes. As he said, sometimes it even takes less. Most people can pack up their things, roll them up, put them away. They're gone in 5 minutes.
Not in a big hurry right now, but I could be if I had to be.
So, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask him. I'm sure he'd answer something for you.
How'd you get started doing this?
I'm a fool. With joining, so I thought it was exciting. And now, how many years later?
Don't you have 11 or 12 years in?
This is 11 years my hobby. Went to an event in Michigan, thought it was really neat. Just got out of college, I have a history degree. I thought, hey, I'd like to try that. And that was 11 years ago, and I haven't stopped since. And every year it gets more fun because of guys like him. The great thing about this hobby is everyone's a historian. Everyone studies and researches and knows about the period, and everyone has their own slant Mark's interests are different than mine. You know, when we sit by the fire, we share and gain and learn and gain and learn every day. It's a fascinating piece of history. In education, it's awesome. So that's why I do it.
French harness. This is an inspection of a soldier's artifacts, what he would be carrying with him. What we have here, bags, probably holding various types of food.
Yeah. No, that's Rounder is Robert, Virginia.
Wallet.
Off to the very first. They robbed them blind. Everything will be for sale.
I don't think we have beef jerky in here, do we, Corporal?
I don't recognize that bag, sir.
You pulled it out of your knapsack.
I don't think so. No, I don't, sir.
This kind of sort of goes with the cribbage board over there, doesn't it,
sir? I don't gamble, sir. You know me.
Sure.
I do not gamble.
He gives us jerky when we play cribbage with him. Housewife?
But Sergeant, I saw you with Sergeant O'Sullivan of this.
Quiet in the ranks. Don't worry, he can skin himself. He doesn't need any help. It's known as a housewife. Holds all your sewing implements. A diary? What, do you keep track of how much money you're winning?
Diary? No, sir. I don't gamble.
I'm not going to open up your wallet.
Please don't.
Silverware? Musket tools? Salt? Tompion. How many of you men have lost your tompions?
Not me, sir. That is mine, sir.
Whittle yourself a new... I know it's yours, Corporal. Whittle yourself a stick. We're inspecting rain. I don't want water down them barrels. It's
water, sir.
And that's a cribbage board.
I found that, sir. I don't know what it is.
You don't know what it is?
No, sir.
You found something and you picked it up. You don't know what it is, and you decided to carry it along with you because you wanted to make your knapsack heavier.
I figured I could send it home, sir, as a souvenir.
Look what I found on the battlefield. A stick with holes in it.
Sir, we told him that was raw dominoes. He had to cut it apart.
That'll be enough.
Yes, sir.
You found the pegs, too, I suppose.
Sir, those are pegs for my shoes. I've been losing my pegs. I had to put them in to get my soles back together.
Spare shirt. Stephanie, who's that?
She's a friend of mine back home, sir.
Must be a good friend.
In case he runs out of ammo.
See the ball?
You always check the insides of these. Every now and then you might, yeah, maybe there's nothing in there. Maybe there is. Camp hat. Good for sleeping. All soldiers have these. But he has two.
I found the other one, sir.
WR.
Winchester rifle, sir.
Is that what you were doing yesterday when you had the...
Frying pan.
Mr. Bain?
Where's your food?
It's here, sir.
Depending on what they used to lace it up with.
Just dump it. Just dump it. He's doing this carefully. I'm wondering what's really in here. Coffee beans, parched corn, lettuce, rice. Where'd you get the rice?
Well, remember Winchester, sir? We had that Georgia unit. They gave it to me.
That was a month and a half ago.
Yes,
this
sir.
isn't a month and a half old rice. We haven't been issued rice in a long time. Well, evidently, you win better than the rest of the men in the unit.
I'm just luckier, sir.
Not anymore. You're on report. We'll talk later.
Yes, Captain.
All right. Bundle it all up, Corporal.
Third company?
Oh. Hopefully, if we're really smart, he's giving them jobs.
Attention order.
Nobody needs that.
Major Hebner of the 7th Michigan Volunteer Cavalry, also known as Custer's Wolverines. Been asked to give you a little talk here on some of the sidearms that you might find the typical cavalry officer of the North carrying during the Civil War. This here is a Colt New Army 1860 44 caliber pistol. This is a civilian version of that pistol. Has a fluted cylinder for weight control. Would have been privately purchased. This would have been an issued item. This one here is also the Colt 44 1860 Army, but it's a Confederate copy because it has a brass frame. They were trying to conserve metal. The end one here is a Colt Navy 1851. This is a 36 caliber weapon. This one and this one were the two most popular weapons of the cavalry in that day. Now, to load one of these, it'd have to be placed on half cock. Powder and a measured amount of powder would have to be placed in each cylinder. Then a greased patch and a ball would have had to have been placed in each cylinder and packed with the rammer. Once every cylinder had been packed and rammed, it would have been filled with bacon fat to prevent chain fire. If there was any type of little particles of dust or gunpowder around the edge, if the weapon was fired, there was a possibility all the cylinders could fire simultaneously. When that was done, the weapon was inverted and caps were placed on each of the nipples. Once they were seated tightly, you were ready to fire. It took about 20 minutes to load one of these handguns. When that was done, you had 6 shots. And here's a little bit what it sounds like. That firearm had an effective range of about 25 feet. Now our unit, a little bit of history of our unit, is we were recruited in the western part of the state of Michigan late summer of 1862. We went to the Eastern Theater and joined the rest of the Michigan Brigade. In time for the Battle of Gettysburg, we met our new commander, George Armstrong Custer, and took part in the Battle at Hanover. It was to our unit that his famous cry, "Ride, you Wolverines," was called. We stopped Jeb Stuart and Wade Hampton at that point. From that point on, our cavalry became the superior, and there's the inferior. We captured every cannon that was turned on us. We captured 58 battle standards, 53 general officers, and 1/3 of the Confederate Army. We also suffered 60% casualties. Currently, we're recruiting. We're offering a $455 bonus. That's combined federal, state, and county. That would buy you a small farm. It's something that you had to seriously consider because conscription was also underway, very vigorously underway, and if you were conscripted for the Army, you would lose that bounty.
Hi, my name is Bill Goodwin from Downers Grove, Illinois. I'm a Civil War reenactor. I'm with the 104th and the 100th Illinois Volunteer Infantry. And when I'm not fighting rebs, I'm doing drawings. And I've been drawing for most of my life, but I've been concentrating on the Civil War for the last 7 or 8 years, which is how long I've been reenacting. Historically, artists would be hired by newspapers to follow the troops, and they would stay to the edge of the battle, make some sketches, and once the battle was over, they'd probably retire to their tent, combine the sketches that they'd made into one great sweeping panoramic view of the battle, and they'd send that back to the newspapers. Alfred Waud was one of the best known artists of the day. and he worked for Harper's. I base a lot of my drawings on photographs that I've taken or on the old photographs by Timothy Sullivan and Matthew Brady, and I generally take the well-known celebrities from the Civil War because among most people they're more popular, but on occasion I'll have someone ask if I can do an obscure cavalry colonel from the Federal Cavalry and say, sure, if I can find a picture of him, I can draw him for you. Here we have the Union commanders, Meade and Chamberlain. This is Colonel Benteen, who is maybe more famous for being with Custer at the last stand, or not being there. His troops were delayed and therefore spared. General Hancock at the generals, General Lee, General Hood, John Bell Hood from Texas. This is Colonel Mosby of the Rangers Cavalry. Stewart, Forrest.
My name is McCaskey. I'm from Scotland, Bill McCaskey, living in the Twin Cities right now. I've been doing this for a number of years, reenacting circuit and what have you. If you're dealing with cigars in the 19th century, particularly in the Civil War situation, what you're mostly talking about is probably Marsh Wheeling cigars. They've been made in the same factory in Wheeling, West Virginia since 1840. And these were extremely popular cigars amongst the troops, also amongst the original Teamsters who would take these along with them. This is where the name Stogie comes from as far as cigars are concerned. The Conestoga wagons that went west with these guys went with these cigars as well, and they were called Stogies after the Conestoga wagons. So it's kind of an interesting piece of history as regards cigar history. If you're looking at pipes, cigar smoking was the prevalent way to do tobacco in the 19th century, particularly amongst soldiers and so on. Meerschaum pipes started to appear in Europe in about 1720. The originally carved ones were carved in Europe, were carved around that time. The Turks had been carving meerschaum into pipes for hundreds of years. By the middle of the 19th century, the design started to get more complicated. Beautifully carved pieces like this were found on either officers would have these, mostly people with a fair amount of money, although some soldiers would have been able to either afford these or creatively acquire them. Briar pipes started to come in at that point too, but meerschaum pipes have always been regarded as the queen of pipes because nothing smokes cooler or drier than a meerschaum. Hence the popularity both with the reenactors now and also with the original people who used these. As far as tobacco in general, the history of this country is a history of tobacco. Tobacco built this nation. Pre- and post-Revolutionary War America was built on tobacco. Not slavery, not cotton, although they figured in, obviously, but particularly tobacco. You even have people like Washington Duke from North Carolina who paid for the establishment of Duke University after the Civil War by growing and selling bright leaf tobacco to particularly the victors, the Union. He took the money that he made selling bright leaf tobacco in North Carolina after the war and bequeathed it to the college in his town, and they turned it into Duke University. There's a phenomenal amount of money. It's woven into the social fabric of the country right from the beginnings of this country, from the colonial days. And by the time you get to the end of the Civil War, tobacco is so generic. Men, women, children, everyone either smoked, sniffed, chewed. Tobacco was used practically for every conceivable purpose. It was originally thought of as a medication. It was prescribed from everything from headaches to asthma by physicians. Tobacco was king, and to some extent still is.
hear me?
Yes, sir!
Left! Face! Right! Face! You're looking that way, Curly. Not at me. I know where I am. Right! Face! Looking good. All right. We're going to go from point A to point B in a military manner. And everybody's going to arrive at the same time. Right?
Yes,
right?
sir! Sir. Sir, yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. All right. We're going this way. Wherever you go, they go. So you guys have got to do it right. All right? We're going to go that way. Until further notice. All right? Keep the head up. All right. Chin up. Shoulders squared away. Arms at the side. Forward. Out of common step. March. Your left. Your left. Your left. Right. Left. Tap.
Are we clear to bring our troops through and dismount them? Bring them through into that other field. You got a misfire.
forth. Over here. As long as you stay in front of the limbers, we'll be all right. And this side of the limbers.
Wasn't about 300 rounds standing there. We've got nowhere to go.
I can't.
The last great shot. I think it started at
We're going to hold this line. Come back. Sir.
It's got all the dismounted.
Dave, hold up. fire!
The Angels of the Battlefield was born. Actually, the concept was born in about 1990. My husband is a reenactor, and I would come to the events, and I would just sit around camp and not do too much. And I decided I want to do something that would show women during the Civil War, something that they actually did, be an active part of reenacting, and get right in the blood and guts of it. And this was what we decided to do, start a nursing corps and be important, historically correct part of reenacting.
Also, too, one thing that what we try to tell here is that the story, and history indeed does have a story to tell, and it's more than what you will find in the history book. It's life actually as it was living back then. It's women and actual participants in the Civil War.
As the trees are not dead, though their foliage is gone, so our heroes are not dead, though their forms have fallen. And thus it gives me great honor at this time to present for his dedicatory remarks of our National Cemetery here at Gettysburg, the President of the United States.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note or long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Forward.
Travel back in time to one of the most fascinating yet tragic periods in American history. The first weekend in October at the Wade House State Historical Site in Greenbush. View the epic struggle as over 1,000 reenactors bring the full fury of battle to life. See Confederate and Union camps, a field hospital, plus cavalry, infantry, and artillery units. Wisconsin's largest Civil War reenactment. The first weekend in October, halfway between Sheboygan and Fond du Lac in Greenbush.